Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's podcast, we have Molly McCafferty, Senior Vice President, Co-Global Claims Director at Shipowner Claims Bureau, Inc., and Molly's also the president of the Connecticut Maritime Association Education Foundation, of which I'm on the board. And it's a great pleasure to be part of that. Just as a side note, we just got done reading some scholarships, and that was scholarship applications, and that was really cool. I'll send you a link to the CMAEF in the show notes. In today's episode of Tell Me More Tuesday, we're going to talk about maritime arbitration, its history, what it is, why it's used in our industry, and probably a few more things along the way. Molly, welcome to the podcast.
Chris, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to participate today.
I think this is going to be great because what I like to try to do on this podcast is just tell people and educate people about little nuances in the industry that maybe they're not familiar with. I mean, I, as an ex-broker, always heard about arbitration, never went to one, thankfully. So before we get started on what it is, why are you an expert in today's topic?
So I have been blessed to be in this industry for many, many years. I have been an owner, an operator, a charterer, a lawyer. I've worked with the clubs. And as a result of that background, I've been involved in arbitration for just about as many years as I've been in the industry, which, a little bit more than 5. I've been a member of as a result of that experience, I joined the Society of Maritime Arbitrators here in New York. And I've been an arbitrator and on that board since about 2016.
So you have a lot more than 5 years experience. I think that's a great way of putting it. I think that's along the lines of like what I have. So you've seen a lot of cases, you've been involved in a lot of cases. Walk us through, what does an arbitrator do? And I know that we have different styles of arbitration. There's New York, there's London, there's now Houston, and I think there's Singapore as well. To walk us through about what arbitration is and why it's used in our industry.
So arbitration is a mechanism for disposing of disputes. It's alternative dispute resolution, if you will, is often what it's referred to. And it's a way to avoid or seek resolution of a problem, whether it's a charter hire dispute, a cargo dispute, anything along those lines. It lets you find a way to resolve it in a manner that's outside of the traditional judicial or court system.
Why is it so effective and so often used in our industry? Why, you see arbitration clauses, and I think I have an arbitration. I think even in when I purchased my house, I think there may be like small claims arbitration, but why is it used in our industry as frequently as it is?
In our industry, it's very unique. It's not the run-of-the-mill dispute that a judge or law clerks or a judicial system across the globe is used to seeing on a regular basis. We have a lot of nuances in terms of language and culture and laws and guidelines. And as a result, the ability to use arbitration allows the parties to resolve it with the guidance or order of someone who's familiar with the industry. Arbitration is purely contractual. It's a contractual remedy. Arbitration only comes into play when there's an arbitration clause that the 2 parties or 3 parties or 4 parties, depending on the situation, agreed to. So you can agree on, traditionally each party chooses their own arbitrator, or an arbitrator might be drawn from a pool of qualified arbitrators. And so you've got someone who understands the industry and can understand what something on subjects might mean, who understands a particular port, what those demands might call for versus what might the clause or vaguely drafted clause in a charter party might say. So it allows some finality. It's usually, and I say usually because there are exceptions to that, it's handled in a efficient, less formal way than a court pleading or litigation might be handled. And so for a lot of, specifically for an industry like maritime, it's a great solution.
Yeah. And one of the things that I know, at least from studying, charter party classes back over 30 years ago with Professor Jeff Weiss, the arbitration, like you said, not only is of what they saw shipping men, but now it's shipping people, I'm sure. But also it's interesting. It's referred to in the industry. So there may be arbitration awards that are not court cases. So it's almost like they are referred to as, as prominent court cases here in the US. You'll refer it to like as one one particular case, the results of that arbitration are used now as precedent. And then that's kind of interesting as well within the confines of maritime.
That's unique to the New York arbitration. If you're talking about the Society of Maritime Arbitrators based here in New York, they are the only arbitral that I'm aware of um, administration that publishes regularly the awards that they issue. Of course, the parties can agree to withhold that publication as well, so they can maintain anonymity. I can't say that word, anonymity. I feel like Nemo. Trying
Don't
to
worry, I
stay
get
an
tripped up
enemy.
all the time now.
So I find that that's a feature. So SMA, or New York arbitration, is it's collectively called. We publish those decisions for that exact reason. It allows parties to understand what their risk may or may not be when they're trying to determine how they want to resolve a problem. It gives them some guidance. Other arbitration groups don't necessarily publish those decisions, so you don't necessarily get that benefit of precedent or direction.
I think that's really interesting because I know from I remember reading some cases again when I was studying in school, and they were referring to SMA, kind of outcomes that they would refer to certain things and saying this is the arbitration panel ruled this way because of, one of the arrived ship. I remember this, I have my notebook is sitting right there. And that was really kind of interesting to me. I think, but regardless, the basic process of walk through, if I want to bring somebody to arbitration, how does this process work? Like, you talk about appointing arbitrators and things like that. Talk a little bit about how it works and then how it's presented and then what happens with the outcome in a very general sense, if you can.
Yeah, so the general mechanics of an arbitration proceeding under SMA rules is, as you suggested, the parties each appoint an arbitrator. The two arbitrators then would choose a chair, who would actually be the person who issues or actually drafts the final award. The parties would then, normally what happens is the parties agree with the guidance of the panel on a discovery process, if you will, whether they're going to exchange documents, whether it's going to be hearings, whether or not witnesses are going to be made available. Again, very unformalized. It's not a traditional discovery process where you're answering interrogatories and requests for production that you would get in a court. But we do still have some of that ability to put some pressure and subpoena if there needs to be, or issue subpoenas if there needs to be that assistance. And then it can be on documents, or it can be, you can have hearings. You could do it either way. Again, the parties usually decide how that's going to play out. And then if it's hearings, it's like a mini trial. You have the panel in a room with both parties. They bring witnesses in, they testify. There might be some documents produced in advance. And then within SMA, we try to issue a final award within 60 days of the close of proceedings.
And the award types, what are you talking? Multi-million dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, kind of somewhere in the between?
A little bit of everything. The beauty of arbitration is it can be something relatively minor. Perhaps there's a cargo case, a decision on, is it a package or is it not a package? Is the limitation going to apply or is it not going to apply? But if it falls under a bill of lading, or that encompasses an arbitration clause, that would be decided by potentially a panel. So if the panel decided it was a package, it might be $500. If it, decided it was, some sort of project equipment that's worth millions of dollars, it could be extended beyond the $500, and it could be that $1 million. We see everything. That's the beauty of arbitration. The parties can agree to arbitrate just about any sort of dispute. It needs to be contractual, and that kind of guides it. Everything from, like I said, charter parties were the traditional basis for the development of SMA and its rules, but we've proceeded to beyond that. Another unique feature about SMA is we can award security. We can require the parties to put up pre-award security in the event that it might be required to protect a potential award that might be issued at some point in time in the future.
One of the things that you kind of a little bit we talked about before is, okay, this process been in place. I mean, like I said, SMA, I knew about it when I was in school. A commercial, that's what it was. It was commercial men. That's what Jeff Weiss used to say. Now we have to say commercial people, maybe commercial folks. I guess we want to be all inclusive, as we talked about before as well. We want to make sure we do a good job there, because it is an interesting industry. One of the questions I had is, you talk about it kind of got its start in charter parties, but as things kind of evolve, I mean, still charter parties is the base for, the contract. What kind of challenges or new features, new things are, is the SMA and arbitration in general starting to see, with a particular question, given that this podcast is about digitization, in the digital realm, how is that starting to disrupt, and is that part of the challenges as you guys go forward as SMA, but just arbitration in general, whether it's in Singapore, whether it's in Houston, whether it's in London, how are you guys kind of taking on board these challenges, digital and beyond?
So great question, Chris. COVID, the ultimate disruptor,
You can say that.
has forced, and I always like to say that it's forced our industry in particular, an industry that was probably slow to adapt to a lot of technology historically. It forced it to jump on that bandwagon, and arbitration was no different. It used to be that all of this was done in person. Hearings were done in person. Insisted that things were done in person. Whether we all had to fly out to Seattle for a witness statement that was being taken, or we would require all of the witnesses to attend in person. All of that's changed as a result of COVID, and technology. Technology is allowing entities and arbitrators and parties to resolve their disputes with a lot more efficiency and more on a more cost-effective basis, by allowing hearings, disputes, things to be resolved, whether it's Zoom or Teams. I've used both of them in my arbitration practice, and it's fantastic. Shipping is global. The requirement to bring a witness who sits in Hong Kong or Spain or England to the United States for that hearing, because the rules suggest that it needs to be, the seat is New York. All of that's changed, and that expense makes it a lot more attractive to go ahead and try and get a decision in arbitration, as opposed to losing out completely, or taking a decision that, or settling something on a basis that you wouldn't normally consider, just because of the cost.
And then it also brings another thing, a competitive, not just for SMA, but these other arbitration centers, to say, well, you don't need to sit in New York now. Like, if you like the way we do our business, it also almost becomes a little bit of a competitive differentiator, right? If you could say, well, we're happy. Look, yes, I know most of your stuff is, let's say, a container line that goes from the West Coast to Asia, right? Well, I want to go Singapore because, most of the folks are in that Pacific Rim. Well, but I really like, in my time when I was at this other line of service, I like SMA, or I like Houston. Oh, now it's well, wait a minute. We've changed and adjusted and adopted our rules to help that. The other part of this question that I have is, are you starting to see cases, or maybe we're actually a little too early, where digital transmissions, transactions, and people are using more, the dispute is around a digital tool? Like, well, your tool told us this, and this is what we did, or like an electronic bill of lading, or things like that. Has that started to trickle into what you guys are doing, or not yet? Are we a little too early for that to work through its system?
It's definitely on the front end of that system. As you say, charts, decisions made on whether or not a safe passage plan was implemented. You're starting to see that vernacular, or come into our vernacular. There's a lot of room for that to grow. I suspect over the next 10 or 15 years. And again, as we were talking offline earlier, these things take a long time to reach, or they can take a long time to reach our desks. Again, the beauty of arbitration is, you can say, I didn't get paid my hire, the window has expired, I'm going to withdraw my ship. And you can have an arbitrator appointed, and an initial request for prejudgment security determined within a very small window. We're talking days or weeks, depending on the situation and where the location is, and whether or not you can get another party on the other side or not. So there's a lot of flexibility with arbitration. So in some of those instances, we are starting to see that technology come into play, in terms of being the dispute, not helping resolve the dispute,
Right.
but
But
actually
yeah,
being what
the one that I kind of I'm waving and I think is going to be interesting is going to be these electronic bills of lading. Right. And I think at some point, and again, I'm not saying it's going to be anybody's fault. I'll be very clear, but there will be a dispute around electronic bills of lading because now you have a piece of paper and this is where it was, and it went from here and it went on a truck up the coast, and you're going to have now, okay, you're going to need to now get arbitrators who understand. I know a lot of them use blockchain, not saying that has to be the only thing, but to understand the technology to what's kind of, maybe not necessarily arbitrators, but certainly you're going to need to call more witnesses who can explain this is how this technology works. I think it's going to be interesting to see as these sort of cases or electronic charter parties or things like that, or statements of the other big thing we talked about ESG a lot off before. My monitor says that I have a monitor on board, or I have this technology on board that says that I am below limits of sulfur. I am not outside the line. Why am I, but you got detained because you were. No, I have a piece of paper from my technology provider that says that I'm not, but the Coast Guard said that you are. And now you're a detained ship, so you're going off a hire. I could see that happening.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Again, the use of technology as it becomes more ubiquitous in the industry is going to become the cause or a main issue or a main focus of some of these disputes we've been discussing. Bills of lading, electronic, again, a great example. With respect to technology on board the ship, that could become an issue with respect to what's happened. So many openings there. From a party perspective, the beauty of, again, arbitration is that you can get it resolved quickly. You can choose who you want to be that arbitrator. So do you want someone to come in and have that background and understand upfront the nuances of this technology? Or do you want to have someone who might be more focused on the legal perspective versus the commercial side? You get to make that choice, and that's having sat on that side of the equation for many, 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 many years. Those are considerations you contemplate before you make that appointment. And sometimes you might sit and have a conversation with a couple of potential people that you are thinking about, just to make sure they understand what issues may or may not be, particularly if you're talking about something on this level of technology that is new. And looking at our roster of under SMA, we have a very diverse and broad group of members. And as a result, there are people who come in with that background and knowledge and understanding that have kind of grown up, if you will, in the industry with respect to the technology changes. There are others who might have more of an understanding of the industry in a bigger picture, but might not be as attuned to that technology.
Yeah, like, what's all right, blockchain, and it's a ledger, blah, 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 or whatever. Well, they may need a half a day course on that to then understand. Or do you want the guy with the blockchain who can understand? Look, it is interesting. And I think I'm curious to see how the challenges, I'm curious to see as SMA and others, I point to SMA only because you publish the results. As SMA starts to see this, like the censor for the owner said this, it was validated. The ship was still detained because the Coast Guard said this. So the charterer put the ship off hire, yet the owner says that was not a valid thing. Okay, now what? We've been off hire for 2 days and the Coast Guard, now what? Right. And now we've lost, whatever. Now what's going to happen? So I think that's going to be an interesting thing. And again, that's just kind of the example that I go through, whether it's fuel, whether it's other pieces of it. I think that's going to be an interesting challenge going forward and something to definitely watch this space. Agreed. Well, any final words? Anything you'd like to share with the audience about arbitration, in general, before we say our pleasant goodbyes?
Just that, having sat in that chair, as I've mentioned, I find arbitration particularly effective with maritime matters. I encourage all people in the industry, whether it's owner, operator, whether it's a vendor or agent, to contemplate and look at those contracts they have. And if they have that option, and having heard where you can get someone who understands our business to review those contracts and make sure you have an arbitration clause in there that allows for, calls for, or requires arbitration as a means of resolving those disputes, because you can better control your outcomes in those circumstances.
Yeah, and I think, arbitration was such a like a taboo word, especially a broker. Oh, arbitration over this clause, like especially if you're a junior guy, you were like went home like crying because my charter parties go to arbitration. Thankfully, I never had to go that far. A couple of my colleagues have. But saying that, it's like you said, you get it to that point where it is a way to almost control the outcome, or at least feel that you have can make your case and not have to explain to people who are not in the industry what a charter party is and why it's important. So anyway, I thank you for your time. This was really good. I hope everybody enjoyed this. Molly, thank you so much, and also really great job with all the work that you do with the CMAEF. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you again for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this discussion about maritime arbitration. Personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the practice deals with new technology that is coming into shipping every day. If you like what you heard, hit the follow button on the top of the episode and please tell a friend. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Aversano, wishing you fair winds and following seas.